your name?
Charlie Acuff.
Carlock Stooksbury.
Joy King.
Hoot Osborne.
My name's Ron English.
David Ezel.
Ray Rutherford.
The boss just went through that door, John Rice Irwin. He's the boss and owner of the Museum of Appalachia.
The Museum of Appalachia Band in a special performance for Tennessee Kaleidoscope. This is Lynn Folk at the Museum of Appalachia in Norris, Tennessee, where I talked with owner John Rice Irwin and listened to the music in this living mountain village and museum. The band, based at the museum, travels around the country, is featured at Disneyland in California in a continuous film performance. The band was also featured in the movie for Tennessee Homecoming '86. Its performances relate to the culture of this Tennessee Valley area, where much of country music began and which was the home of some well-known country music stars. Here's John Rice Irwin.
I guess the Museum of Appalachia Band sort of happened. We used to get together here at the museum on Sunday afternoon when several people were coming in. The response was pretty good, so we formed a sort of an official type band, and we started playing for special groups, especially during the World Fair when we had groups coming into this area from all over the world, actually. And now we play for different groups in this area and in other states and so forth. And we played today, for example, we just got back, as you know, playing for the Oneida City School System. This was an in-service training. We try to include something about the local history, heritage, culture of the region, and when we play a song, we talk about how it relates to the culture and how it relates to the people and to the times and so forth. We're playing for the National Trappers Association in Cogswell, Tennessee, and we've played from groups from England and many groups from New York, and we just got back the other day recording out in Hollywood for Disneyland, and they're showing our group every day, I guess over a period of years, in this big round theater there at Disneyland.
It taught me to weave, it taught me to mourn, it taught me to leave my home. All those lonesome pines and
Have you lived in this area all your life?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, my people came into this valley in 1784 and have been here ever since. They lived in the same general area and the same small community until 1934, when Norris Dam was built and the people in that area had to leave. We went down to where Oak Ridge is now located and stayed there until 1942, and the government came along again, said they needed our land the second time, so we moved sort of between the Norris Lake and Oak Ridge, because I think that this area is sort of the seedbed of all the country music. Well, Roy Acuff was from the tiny little county that I'm from. Chet Adkins is from that county, Union County. Lois Johnson and many others. Many of the early people in country music came from this general area, right in this Tennessee Valley section here. And the governor, when he had the sort of organizational meeting for the homecoming thing, he had Minnie Pearl and several members of the state legislature here. Alex Haley, of course, lives across the road now, and he joins in our band, as a matter of fact, and introduces some of the songs.
In a later program, more about the Appalachian Museum from owner John Rice Irwin. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. This is Lynn Folk. In a previous program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope featured the Museum of Appalachia Band. Today, more about the museum itself from owner-operator John Rice Irwin. This is Lynn Folk with him in Norris, Tennessee, at the museum, which began in the early 60s with one log building on 2 acres of land. Now there are dozens of authentic log structures, which have been moved to the museum complex from neighboring sites in the Tennessee Valley area, and there are more than 250,000 items from pioneer days on display.
I guess in the beginning, I appreciated so very much the older people of the community. I had the good fortune of growing up with all 4 of my grandparents, and I thought they had so much to offer, and they were such colorful, interesting people, not only my grandparents, but the other old people with whom I associated. And I guess it was a natural inclination to want something that belonged to them. And that's sort of the way I started the museum, and I think this particular theme has continued, tying the item to the individual. Now there's over 250,000 items here in the museum now, and you see over here this corner cupboard that I just brought in last night. That belonged to an old gentleman who was murdered along with his wife in 1894, and several other members of the family were shot at and some wounded and so forth. The criminals who were involved in it were hanged at the courthouse, and my grandfather was there. But the old cupboard sat in the room where they were murdered. So it has a special meaning, and when I display it, I will display the story of the hanging and all this kind of thing. Most things are not quite so bizarre, but the items that I have, I like to tie them to a particular happening, and I like to include who made them, why it was made, what hollow it was made in, and those items come alive if you know the background of them.
The term hollow, I'm originally from California, and I never heard the word hollow, I think, until I came to Tennessee. You hear a lot about hollows here in East Tennessee.
Well, you hear more about hollers. The natives would not know what you were talking about if you called it a hollow. He lives up in Dog Holler, or, this holler and so forth. The valleys were pretty scarce, and I guess a hollow is just a small ravine or valley running off usually of the bigger valley.
Is there something you'd like to say about life in Tennessee or what Tennessee has meant to you especially?
Well, I think the people, not only in Tennessee but in the southern Appalachian region, have a lot to offer for all of us. So many of the attributes that they had would be well implanted in today's society. And I encounter this over and over again. Not only the physical things that they had, the material culture, the furniture and this kind of thing is being collected, but also their philosophy, their ideas, and their whole outlook on life is very similar to what many people are coming back to. They feel like they're just discovering it all on their own, but really it was here a long time ago.
And I guess you hear comments like that from the people that come here, don't you, the visitors that come?
Yeah, this is true. I enjoy being out in the mountains and talking with the people. Just Saturday, I was visiting an old fella, and he remembered I had been to his house 18 years ago, and when I left, I had bought some things, and I dropped a pair of real old glasses, spectacles, and he told his wife to go get them. He had them laid up on the fireboard or the mantel, and hoping that I'd come back, and he'd kept them. They'd kept them all those 18 years, just hoping I'd come back so they could give them to me. So this exemplifies the honesty and friendliness and integrity of the people, I think.
The Museum of Appalachia in Norris, Tennessee, where owner John Rice Irwin continues to acquire and display items from earlier days. To quote the New York Times, it's a discovery of a way of life. Roots author Alex Haley says he loved it so much that he built a home within sight of it. The Museum of Appalachia is a place to visit especially as Tennessee comes closer to Homecoming 86.
It's time to stop and look at where we've been. You can see it all from Jonesboro to Memphis. America is coming
Tennessee
home
Kaleidoscope made
again.
possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. Homecoming theme music by H. Jackson Brown Jr. This is Lynn Folk.
Country music that I love. Get ready, Tennessee, we're coming home. Get ready, Tennessee, we're coming home.
I believe that quilts are a part of our lives, that they're our heritage. I believe that it's everyone's duty to protect what they have and save them and make sure that future generations know about them and know that they are a part of our lives, and they're really threads of our lives. They're interwoven so many ways. Every quilt tells a story, lots of stories, happy ones and sad ones, but the maker tells a story in her quilt.
Every quilt has a story, and some have more than that. Some old ones have rips and tears and spots. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope as I talked with Millie Leathers when the crowd was assembling to hear a lecture by her on care and preservation of old quilts. That was at the National Quilting Association convention in Bell Buckle, Tennessee. Millie Leathers is a Tennessee native from Red Boiling Springs. She now lives in Vernon, Indiana, where she is quilt and textile director for the Jennings County Historical Society and Museum. She's collected old fabrics all her life and even has a fabric bank where hard-to-find pieces of cloth are available to quilt lovers. And here is her advice and her answer to a most frequently asked question.
The most frequently asked question is how to remove these spots. And of course the answer would be very general because you have to look at a quilt. Each quilt has to be solved. The problems have to be solved individually. The minor spots can be removed by, I have a little solution that I use of cream of tartar mixed in a light paste like Grandma used to make with soda to go on my wasp sting. A paste about that consistency and put on your quilt. And it will dry very quickly and flake off, and this is a dry cleaning method. And the other method, using the same thing, but not necessarily, if it's not a bad spot, you can use just water and take it into the sunshine, lay a sheet on the ground, lay your quilt on top, expose the spot to the sunshine, and let Mother Nature do her work.
Does it make a difference what kind of fabric the quilt is made of?
Well, the quilt is going to be made of cotton. We didn't have all of these synthetic fabrics, thank heavens, and they were natural fibers, so nature's going to take care of most of the stains, and more than likely the stains are going to be natural that are in them, and they're probably going to be vegetable or grease, and will be removed by a method that is not going to be harsh to the quilt. And this is why cream of tartar is very gentle. A solution of lemon juice and salt can take stubborn stains out, but I don't recommend this until I see the spot itself. This is what I call a more drastic method. Cream of tartar can be used to dry clean a quilt that you would not want to wash. Anytime that you do any kind of cleaning on a spot that has a color in it, you test the spot very carefully. Just test it with water and blot it to see if it is permanent or if it's going to run.
Well, I have a question concerning quilts when they begin to get threadbare. Can you patch them, or do you try to, or just leave them that way? Or when they begin to wear really thin, or if you found one that's real old and it already is kind of cracked?
There are actually more sources than you can imagine available today to repair the old quilts. Visit your local antique shop and buy antique blocks, pieces of antique quilts, old quilts that are perhaps worn and no good for other purposes, but if they match the fabrics in your quilt, go to a caring antique dealer and she will help you find an old fabric. And I'm actually working on an idea of a bank for antique fabrics, which will be available to real serious quilt lovers. I already have one. I've done this for years at no charge, and it's something that I don't feel that you can charge for, and I've been justly rewarded.
Millie Leathers of Vernon, Indiana, at the National Quilting Association convention in Bell Buckle, Tennessee, where she lectured on the importance of preserving the things of the past in today's throwaway society. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts and the Tennessee Arts Commission. This is Lynn Folk. Scottish country dancing, not only an art form but a social activity enjoyed by and sustained by members of the Scottish Society of Middle Tennessee. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope with Betty Lynn at her shop, The Scottish Accent, located in Nashville's Harding Mall. Betty Lynn has lived in Tennessee for several years. She's an active member of the Scottish Society here, and she especially enjoys the dancing of her native country.
Scottish country dancing is often described as a type of folk dancing, but it's truly a form of ballroom dancing, with its elegance and carefully detailed steps which have been passed down by word of mouth for generations. Most country dances are dances of progression, usually longwise of the set or around the room in formation, and they allow each couple to progress up and down the dance until everyone has had the position of leading couple. There are 5 steps in the traditional dances: the skip change of step for traveling, the slip step for traveling in a sideways direction, and the paddy basque for setting. They're used in reels and jigs. The other 2 steps appear only in the strathspey, and the 3 tempos are reels, jig, and strathspey, and the latter is slower and smoother than the first 2, but it's more demanding in power and strength and balance. Country dancing it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. It really is, and we enjoy it.
Is this type of dancing done in Scotland now all the time, or is it just for festivals and special occasions?
It's still done in Scotland, and back in the early 20th century, in the 1920s and that, they were afraid that it was going to die out completely. But certain segments of the population got together, and the Duke of Atholl was instrumental in reviving the Scottish country dancing in Scotland. The Queen became a patron, and that's where it gets the title, the Royal Society for Scottish Country Dancing. And of course she still is a patron. And we have a group here in Nashville that meets every Friday night at St. George's Episcopal Church. The class is taught by Mr. James Hamilton. We usually have about 18 to 20, sometimes 24 people there.
These people who come, are they all originally from Scotland?
No, there's actually only 3 of us who are actually from Scotland, and the others are all of Scottish descent that are interested in Scottish country dancing.
Well, you also have some other organizations here, don't you, involving the people from Scotland?
Yes, we have formed a Scottish society. It's called the Scottish Society of Middle Tennessee. The Scottish country dancing is actually a spin-off of the society. We formed the society. We had 2 organizational meetings to see how much interest, and there was quite a bit of interest. And we meet 4 times a year in January, April, July, and November.
For more information about the Scottish Society of Middle Tennessee, Scottish country dancing and music, tartans, plaids, Scottish jewelry and art, talk to Betty Lynn at the Scottish Accent in Harding Mall in Nashville. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts and the Tennessee Arts Commission. This is Lynn Folk.
At my home, we never had books. We had a Bible. And I read my first novel in high school. I had a great English teacher, and she brought me Robert Burns's poetry, and I went wild. I could identify with that book. I loved that book. Robert Burns was not dead, although he was born in 1759, died in 1796. But he walked with me from 1922 to 1926, my 5 miles to and 5 miles home, Greenup High School. Robert Burns. I wore his books out. And then there's Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Two notable influences in the life and writings of the late Jesse Stuart. Although he lived in Kentucky and was poet laureate of that state, his career as a writer really began in Tennessee. Later, his poems, stories, and books were published in more than 30 countries in many languages, and his writings included in college textbooks all over the world. He also lectured in Europe, Africa, the Near East, Middle East, and in the Orient. He returned to Nashville many times and often was interviewed on WPLN. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope with some excerpts from those conversations, beginning with his recollection of the Vanderbilt term paper, which later became one of his bestsellers, Beyond Dark Hills.
It's the first prose book I ever did. I was 23 years old. We were asked to write a term paper at Vanderbilt, all in Dr. Mims's class. And I was asked to write a term paper not under 8 typewritten pages and not over 18. Well, I never could stand limits, to be limited on writing something to the word. And then I wanted to tell Dr. Mims what a long struggle I'd had to get to Vanderbilt. And so I just told him when I wrote, I had 11 days to write the term paper in. I wrote it in 11 days, 322 pages, from margin to margin. And Dr. Mims, when I weighed, everybody handed in the paper, he took mine, he weighed it with his hand, and then he said, "You know, Stuart, you hand me a paper like that and you're failing my class." And 3 days later, I never got such compliments in my life from Dr. Mims. He says, one of the greatest papers I ever had handed in to me since I've been teaching, 43 years at that time. He said, "You're just genius." He said, the first time it ever been said of me. He said that. And of course I was pleased at his comment. Well, that went on 6 years later and was published as my third book. And New York Times, somebody questioned why would an author, 29 years old, be writing his autobiography. What if they'd known that I'd written it at 23 and hadn't passed my English course? I'll tell you something else about Dr. Mims. He went on backing me to the day he died. He was my backer. He spoke everywhere glowingly of me. And he was over and he spoke at Trinity University in Ireland. And George Russell, they called him A.E. in the initials, one of Ireland's big poets and a great literary man these days, told Dr. Mims over there that he said, "You know, I have just read a book that's the best book that's come out of America since Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass." And Dr. Mims says, "What book is it and who's the author?" He said, "The author is Jesse Stuart and the book is Man with the Bull-Tongue Plow."
How many books and how many articles and how many stories and how many poems, if you have any way of knowing?
Well, I have a way of knowing. I have a bibliographer, Dr. Hensley Woodbridge, who teaches at the University of Southern Illinois. He says 42 books, I believe, or 43, and 430 short stories, 2,050 poems, plus that now. He's not up on it, and I've had too much published, maybe.
Do you ever go back and read them over?
I can't stand it. I don't go back and read a book of mine at all. When I do the book, it's over. I have the new one to do. I'm thinking of that in terms of writing stories and more books.
I had an experience the other day which illustrates how well known you are, I think. I happened to be in the elevator and I had 2 or 3 of your books in my arm. A gentleman got on the elevator whom I did not know, and he looked at me and then he looked at those books and he said, "Jesse Stuart." And he looked at me again, he said, "I like him."
One time when I was coming down here to speak to the teachers of Davison County, going through Cerrito Canova, I was arrested for speeding. I was going 5 miles beyond there's a slow zone, and a fellow, young police, took me out, and he said, "Let me have your driver's license." Well, I gave him a driver's license. And he said, "Did you write The Thread That Runs So True?" I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "That's the reason." He says, "I'm part-time police here." He said, "I go to Marshall University, and you're the man that caused me to go to college." He said, "I wouldn't arrest you for anything."
Poet, novelist, short story writer, and educator Jessie Stuart, 1907 to 1984. Tennessee Kaleidoscope made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts and the Tennessee Arts Commission. This is Lynn Folk.
I don't have a specific costume because usually in a program I would do stories from various South African tribes. Therefore, if I wear only a Swazi costume, it will limit me to do only the Swazi stories. So I try to wear a Lesotho hat, which is the original storytelling hat that they wear. Then I would, for example, wear a Zulu blanket and maybe a Venda jewelry or something like that to give an idea, because I don't mean to stereotype some of the people and some of the cultures that I research on. It is such a respected thing to be a storyteller, and it's a chosen position. Therefore, I want to give a broad idea to the audience.
Storyteller and folklorist Estelle Condra, who has been seen and heard in many countries in stage performances and on radio and television. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope with Estelle Condra as we talked about one of her talents, storytelling. She was born in South Africa and came to the United States in 1973 after her marriage to a Nashvillian. First, she lived and worked in Atlanta, where she established a drama school, and now she lives in Nashville.
My training was, of course, in theater and drama at the University of South Africa in Pretoria. And then I went to London to the Toynbee Theatre School, where I studied more and specialized in children's theatre, as well as Greek and Shakespearean theatre. Then I went back to South Africa and then started my school there. And I had my school approximately 4 years before I ran into this American that stole my heart away. And so here I am now in Nashville, doing lots of theater, as you know, and storytelling. I call it story theater because I present it in a different way, and especially the African research that I do on the African folklore, and do it in the style which the African storytellers would do. I also use a specific system of voice notes and tone color and a specific way of voice inflection and a definite change in the tempo and the rhythm of speech so that I can almost recreate some of the Bantu languages. The Bantu languages sing, and they use specific cadences when they speak. And so when I recreate it in English, I try to recreate that specific sound quality.
Could you give me an example of it?
Yeah, let me see. Girls walking through the grass, and this is the way they would walk. Hey! Now they walk down the path. Hey! And their leather skirts went she-ah, see. Now they passed an old man sitting in the grass, and they said, "Hey, dumela, papa! Ah, okay, papa! Hey! Papa, look with the eyes that see, and speak with the tongue that speaks the truth. Which one of us is the prettiest?"
You are all beautiful. Daughters of my captain. Daughters of the village of Louis. See. But that one in the middle, that tall one, the one they call Tom Bibi, that one is the most beautiful of anyone.
That's something quite unusual to find here in Tennessee.
I think so. I think the reason why it has been so popular almost around the country is because it's so different and unique. I heard they say it's unusual.
Estelle Condra, storyteller, dramatist, writer, lecturer, educator, and recording artist, who returns frequently to her native South Africa. Just recently, she spent a week living with the Zulu tribe. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. This is Lynn Folk.
Ever since launching a career as a folklorist, I've been trying to work myself back home. I feel very fortunate to return, especially at such a advantageous time when folklore and folk arts can fit so closely into the statewide activities that will mark the 86th celebration.
Tennessee Kaleidoscope with Roby Cogswell, who's been Director of Folk Arts for the Tennessee Arts Commission since October of 1984. He grew up in Shelbyville, spent several years in Kentucky with the Kentucky Arts Council, documenting folk arts and developing public programs highlighting folk arts. Now he's back in Tennessee, enjoying the rich traditions of this state.
Tennessee recognizes its traditions. The three grand divisions of the state, the diversity found in Tennessee, all go in, I think, to strengthening Tennessee's sense of place, its pride in its traditions, the things which people in the state share in common, and also the things that make their particular part of the state unique, so that the Homecoming 86 activities, I think, have a very strong base in local pride and sense of place to work with.
As Director of Folk Arts, Roby Cogswell works with the State Arts Commission Grants Program and is working with Homecoming 86 on a national scale in cooperation with the Smithsonian Institution.
We're trying to get plans underway for stimulating and advising local folk arts programs in conjunction with the anticipated featuring of Tennessee in the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, another activity that I'll be involved with, acting as a liaison person for the Smithsonian's researchers in the state and helping make arrangements for the presentation of Tennessee in Washington that summer. I am also involved in this position with the Tennessee State Museum, their folk arts collections and activities, and we are hoping to initiate some exhibits during 86 highlighting Tennessee folk arts.
When you say folk arts, just what kind of arts are you talking about?
People say, ask 10 folklorists and you'll get 10 different definitions. A definition that I like to use is that folk arts are creative and expressive practices that are passed on by word of mouth or by customary example. That is, most folk arts have been learned from one person to another, as folk songs have been passed down from one generation to another, rather than being taught in a formal school situation or through books and literate processes. So that folk arts, on the one hand, go back very far into the past, and very often folk arts of one locale may share a lot with folk arts of the similar cultural region. On the other hand, in the passing down of folk arts, individuals very often play a strong role in innovating upon the artistic tradition and in turn pass along some of their own personality to the people who learn from them.
This folk arts program of the Tennessee Arts Commission is not new, but currently it's being revived and expanded.
In our efforts to rejuvenate the folk arts program at the Tennessee Arts Commission is our need to develop our network of information and resource people concerned with folk arts throughout the state. We need to expand our mailing lists and get in contact with people who practice folk arts, who are interested in folk arts, or who research folk arts throughout the state. One of the functions of our program is to serve as a clearinghouse of information about traditional arts in the state. We want to expand our our register of active folk artists and developing our inventory of human resources. That's kind of a cold term, but there are people underneath all of those, and we hope to be able to spend time with them.
Roby Cogswell, Director of Folk Arts for the Tennessee Arts Commission, is requesting especially that everyone interested and working with folk arts and folklore contact him at the Tennessee Arts Commission office in Nashville as the state prepares for Tennessee Homecoming 86.
Look at where we're going. It's time to stop and look at where we've been. You can see it all from Jonesboro to Memphis. America is coming home again. Coming home.
This program, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. This is Lynn Folk.
Get ready